Welcome to another Paradox podcast. I'm Dr. Steve, and with me is my lovely wife, Dr. Ruth. So we are a paradox. Well, today we are going to continue thinking about the road of transformation as we are taking a walk in history. That's actually the title there on the top of page 32 of the study guide. And that's where we're going to be, page 32, and also that map on page 33. Now, all of this we're anchoring to 2 John 3. So there's no chapters, so we just say the verse 3, and we're using this verse to help guide our thinking during this course of the road of transformation. That verse says, "Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and love." Now, Ruth, as I see even in the title, the word history, I know that I should just start to be quiet and pass the baton off to you.
I think that looking at the history will especially help us to understand why truth and love are really important for this church and also for us. Because there is lots of confusion around the Ephesus church because they have lots of influences around them that could draw them away from Jesus, away from the truth, and could tempt them to not be loving each other.
Why are we talking about Ephesus when I mentioned 2 John?
Because that's the church that this letter is written to by John. Now, I'm going to test your knowledge. There's a quiz on page 32, the Ephesus quiz. Let's go through the quiz together and talk about them as we go. True or false? Ephesus is the city where the church in Revelation had lost its first love.
True. I know that because I preached, and as a church, we looked at the book of Revelation, and I believe that is the first of the 7 churches that there was a message to. And that was the one where we're told that they lost their first love. They were so good at wanting to keep heresy out of the church that anyone that came, they were very suspicious about. And you get the idea that there was suspicion even within the church itself. So we might say a climate of suspicion right there in Ephesus. When we think that they lost their first love, it would be they lost their love for God. But we know from Ephesians that this church was highlighted for their love for one another. So I have a feeling that this losing their first love obviously would include their love for God, but it would be they've lost their love for one another, for the saints.
When you look at the history, you can see that there's a lot going on within the Ephesus church because there's a lot of different groups that have come together to make up this church. There's Jews that are saying you got to follow the law. That's what you got to do. There's Jews that have been influenced by Greeks who say, yeah, follow the law, but also you got to bring in Greek philosophy. And then there's also people who have come out of the Greek culture and become Christians who are saying, well, we got to bring in some of my culture into this too, some of the philosophy that we've been taught. And so you've got all these things. And so discerning what is the truth is really important, and it would be very tempting to have lost love for each other.
Right away, we see this idea of truth and love, right? The banks of the river, the stream that is bringing God's mercy into our lives. The church has to deal with that from the inside and from those attacking from the outside. In the book of Acts, it's mentioned how Paul says, when I leave you, there's going to be these savage wolves that are going to come in. And he's just aware that there's just so much attack on the church back then. And we know that there's an attack on the church today. People wanting influence that may be teaching false doctrine or wanting to do that, also getting a lot of money from the church. It's like they're fleecing the flock.
And during this time, there were preachers that would go around from house church to house church in this region. And by the way, we're talking about modern day Turkey, which back then was part of the Roman Empire. And they would come to a house church and say, "Oh, I've got a word from God." And they'd come and preach, and it might be a little off. And then they'd get the church to give them shelter, food, clothes, money, and then they'd move on to the next one. In fact, it was such a problem that in this next century, there is this Greek writer, not a Christian, named Lucian, who writes a very funny satire called Peregrinus. It is about a false preacher who makes his living by tricking churches into giving him money, food, and lodging. And he's not even a believer when he's writing this. That's how prevalent this was and continued to be. So they did have to be on their guard.
So I got number one right?
You got number one right, and we actually have wandered to other parts of the page in our conversation. Let me give you number two. Okay. Not because I don't think you'll get it right, but that is also true. There's this philosopher whose name is Heraclitus, and he came up with this idea that there is out there this logos, which the word logos in Greek means word. So this word that is an impersonal force, kind of like the force in Star Wars, that is neither good or bad, that is supporting the entire universe. So that's Heraclitus' idea. And the Greeks in Ephesus are really proud of Heraclitus. It's been 500 years since he was alive, and yet they still talk about him and say, we're the place where Heraclitus was born. This idea of an impersonal logos is trying to seep into the church as well. And in the Gospel of John, John actually starts his gospel by saying, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. The words, God is not an impersonal force. He is one who loves us and wants to be with us so much that he became flesh and died and rose again. So John's gospel is very much framed within this context of the Greeks in Ephesus. So that one's true.
Okay. True.
True. And then I'll give you the next one too. The city dedicated to the goddess Artemis, goddess of hunting and virginity. Yes, there was a huge temple to the goddess Artemis, which is also known by the Romans as Diana, that was in the center of Ephesus. And people came from miles around to see this wonder of the temple of Artemis.
This small church, the house church, and the house churches in the surrounding area, they're just in a place that has a lot of paganism, a lot of false gods, false ideas, and to remain true to the Lord and to say that Jesus is Lord and that there's only one God, this is probably going to bring persecution.
It will. On top of that, this is a Roman capital. Oh, wait, I just gave it away.
All right.
Next one, number 4, is also true. It was the capital, like a capital of a state, the province of Asia. Usually we think of Asia as like China and Korea and that region, but this Asia was more like Turkey and that region of the world. Rome had their capital in Ephesus. And Rome saw Christianity as an illegal religion. So that caused trouble for the Christians too. Now, Rome's policy was kind of a don't ask, don't tell. We won't ask you if you're a Christian, and you don't tell us, and you'll be okay. But there would be signs, like on the emperor's birthday, Domitian required people to offer him a sacrifice where you would pour a little wine out on an altar on his birthday because he was seen as a god. Christians wouldn't do that if they were true Christians. They would refuse to honor Domitian in that way. It's a small thing, but it could get you in a lot of trouble. And it also would make Christians very hesitant about, who do I invite? Are they going to betray us if they know we're Christians?
Oh, let me answer number 5. Okay, so I've seen a pattern. True, 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 true. So I'm going to say number 5 is true. The city that was a major commercial center for the Roman Empire. Did I get that right?
You did. It is indeed true.
Okay. Well, I'm actually looking at the map on page 33 in the study guide, and I do see Ephesus. It's there in the Aegean Sea, which is below the Black Sea, and they're kind of above what should say Mediterranean Sea, but it says Internum Mar.
That means Mediterranean Sea. It's Latin.
So it's there on the west side of what would be modern day Turkey. So what do you mean that it was a major commercial center for the Roman Empire?
Yes, it was a major commercial center. You have the port at Ephesus where the ships would come in and they'd offload their goods, and then they'd go up and down the Roman built roads, because Romans like to build a lot of roads, to the various other cities. So you had lots of goods moving through. And that meant that you had lots of guilds that were in the city of Ephesus. Now, a guild is like a union of people who deal with a particular kind of good. Like there would be purple dye that would sell just purple dye. And those guilds were all dedicated to particular gods. For example, a weaver's guild might dedicate themselves to the goddess Athena. So that meant that when you went to a guild meeting, you would be expected to sacrifice. So one of the difficulties that Christians had was, how do I be a member of this guild when I'm not going to do the sacrifices? And when I'm going to declare that there's only one God and that the God of this guild has no meaning? So what do you do with that? So there's lots of pressure on these Christians, and not just in Ephesus, but in all of the early New Testament Christians. They had these kinds of pressures on them.
So living in first century Ephesus had to be difficult for the Christians.
It would have been difficult, yes. You've got all these gods. It's polytheistic. That means lots of gods. You've got lots of different cultures with their ideas coming together. And you're in a position where your religion, your faith, is been declared illegal by the Roman Empire, and you're in a capital city. And on top of that, you've got factions within the church, those Christians who wanted to insist that people kept Jewish law, those that want to incorporate ideas like the famous Logos idea that was famous in Ephesus. And then, of course, you've got a bunch of people that it's like, I don't know, which way do I go? And then these itinerant preachers that are preying on churches. So all of that was going on. If you turn over to page 36 for just a minute in 2 John, and you see that they're talking about reminding them to live according to the commandment. This is verse 5. Now I ask you, lady, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but one which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. So, loving one another and walking according to what Jesus commands and remembering what Christ has done for us. Those are key things that the church is being called to remember in this letter because of all that confusion around them.
As we wrap up this particular Paradox podcast, just want to remind all of you that are listening that we are now shifting into a new topic area called the Road of Transformation. And we're going to be using 2 John 3 as the anchor and kind of helping to guide our thinking. And in that verse, it talks about grace, mercy, and peace, and that it would be there in truth and love. So, Ruth, I thank you how you are helping us to see these guiding principles that were to be there in the church. Truth and love, both are necessary, and both are what brings guidance to God, bringing his grace, his mercy, and his peace to us. So, is there anything else that you want to add before we close this podcast?
No, but I welcome any questions that anyone has about the history of this time period. I'm happy to expand more.
Okay, well, there's that open invitation for you to ask Ruth questions. You can certainly do so when we come back together. So, as we always say, we both are really looking forward to when we get to be back with you all again, face to face.